Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Laura Hanson with Connect My Brain. I am so excited to be with you and bring in this new series. I'm going to really focus on the reflexes, and this is going to encompass three areas: withdrawal reflexes, primitive reflexes, and postural reflexes. And this will be over several weeks' time. And please make sure you go over to the YouTube channel, Dr. Laura Hanson, because you can see the videos that are attached to the podcast. But before we get started, let me give you a little bit of background why these reflexes are so important, not only to me, but to the clinical picture, especially when we're looking at how our children develop, and even still why you might be experiencing some things and can kind of go back and say, I've always felt this way. It never surprises me how when I'm working with adults in neurofeedback, and we get to a point that we're going to do a more personalized 19-channel program. And so we start off with a questionnaire. And as we go through the questionnaire, oftentimes there are so many areas related to learning that are scoring very high. And I'll look at them and I'll go, have you felt this way forever? And they'll respond as far back as I can remember. So many times people are dealing with things, and it could be an adult, it could be a child. But when it's an adult, you have worked your whole life with it. You've done your very best to adapt and create strategies, but has it also been a bit of a roadblock? Maybe just inches away from getting you exactly where you want to be. And the reflexes are that category that might explain some of the things that you feel, some of the ways that you do certain things. When it comes to children, they're still so close to the beginning of their nervous system getting wired up that when we can get any type of retained reflex integrated, it can be the real game changer and change that child's trajectory so that they are becoming everything that they're meant to be. I have been in the world of reflexes, my goodness, probably since about 2000 and maybe 6 or 7. It goes way back for me. In fact, it is the very thing that led me into neurofeedback, because as we get into the primitive reflexes and I begin to discuss the Moro reflex, that was the one that I spent a lot of time trying to help parents understand that heightened, startled response in their child, but it just wasn't easy for them to see nor connect the dots and know the clinical picture. But we'll dive into Moro probably next time. But when we look at the reflexes, they really outline the blueprint of how a human being is going to go from a mass of cells into human life. And I even have some interesting video and picture to share with you. And that is why it is so important for you to also go over and see this on a YouTube channel so that you can get the full breadth of everything that we're talking about. But when I learned about reflexes, it helped me understand that these are actually thought of as central pattern generators. They actually precede sensory motor. So here's many children running around with a sensory motor dysfunction, label, assumption, etc. And there is something before that. So we don't just jump into sensory motor. Our nervous system has been getting primed for a very long time. In fact, I would tell you that it's even being influenced before you're actually conceived in your mother's womb, because life is a culmination of the man and woman that come together and create this life in with help of the Holy Spirit and God, of course. And trying to really appreciate the reflexive component, that it's magical, it's magistry of how innately we get wired. Before I jump in to all the clinical aspect of the reflexes, I've been watching this show called The Chosen, and if you haven't seen it yet, I really encourage you to go see it. It's available on Angel Studios app as well as the Chosen app. And it is the story of Jesus Christ. And last night I was watching the debut of season 3, episode 4. And after the episode, they did a Gen Z interview with 9 young people, because it was a group of people that they had not been able to gather their influence received by the show or given to the show. And so they invited 9 young people to come to the studio and observe the show. And they were from so many different walks. There was a young man who always thought of himself as an atheist. There was a young girl who grew up in a very broken home and had a lot of turbulence with her mother. There's another young man who his parents had him involved in a church cult. The walk of what these young people have already gone through is amazing to me. And watching their transformation as they watch this show, and even get to meet the actor Jesus in their journey and in their experience, and the changes that went on. Why do I bring this up? Because there's so much that goes on for each and every one of us all the time. And we do have a system that is constantly monitoring our life and figuring out what we need. And these reflexes are a foundational piece. They are the rudimentary place of all learning. So it's very easy to have an experience that creates so much stress in a system, even in young people, that can actually push them back. And these reflexes exist in your brain stem. And you can go back into that brain stem because things have gotten so out of control, so overwhelming, that you need something else. And so many of these young people were talking about mental health issues. And my heart was it was so heavy listening to how many things people are already going through, and especially young people, because they don't have all the skill and the development of their frontal lobe and the experience on a mature level to know exactly what to do. And so it's an example, first of all, that in a digital form, we live in a digital world. And when Jesus was here at that time, they needed to see exactly what he could do. And this particular show is reaching out to people at a level that we've all become incredibly accustomed to, digital. But it is crowd-funded. It is free to watch. And the stories, it is one story after another of lives being changed. So while I know there's so many things that we can do clinically, I do truly believe that it is our spiritual life that must be intact in order for the same miracle of life. When an egg and sperm come together, they've actually found that there is a light that is illuminated in the womb. And this light represents something so beyond us. Just having the opportunity to work in healthcare and to learn and to experience and to share is a gift, in my opinion. My tagline for Connect My Brain is to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. It is so easy to get stuck. It is so easy to start to drift into a pattern that you don't even know you're headed in that direction. And before you know it, it is all consuming. And you think about the level of anxiety that exists, the amount of suicide that has gone on over the last 3 years, and how much depression and uncertainty. And I will always try to be a pillar of light and hope, that while I take my mere human mind and try to bring it together, I want you to know that there are so many things that you can do in order to transform your mind, your life, your body. You got to be willing to be an active participant. You got to be willing to look at things from a different lens. And sometimes it takes time, and that's okay. You may not be able to jump into the whole picture all at once, but if you just do one little thing at a time, before you know it, you'll get your brain going in the direction that you want it to go in. And these reflexes, they paint a picture of the steps and the progression and the direction that we go into for all different sorts of reasons. The initial reflex system that I want to talk about is the withdrawal reflex. So when we talk about reflexes, every one of them have an early stage that they're responsible for, something that they're going to do in your nervous system to get things all wired up. But then they're supposed to grow up. The primitive form should be able to integrate, and a more mature form should take over. So today, let's focus first on the withdrawal reflex. And the name is really a great descriptor. We're talking about 6 weeks of life. You are going through this environment as an experience. And the environment is nothing but your little bitty body, as well as the amniotic fluid. That's all it is. So how much can really be coming from this experience? Well, let's kind of break down some of the pathways. So we know that there is a pain pathway. We know there's a cold pathway. We know there is a warm or hot pathway. We know that there is a crude touch pathway, but there's also a light touch pathway. And that light touch is something so soft in your environment that early on you're being trained to move away from it. So the very first thing that happens in our nervous system is we learn survival. We learn to pay attention. We learn to experience. We learn to interpret. We learn to be aware of that light touch sensation. And initially, what we're going to do is we're going to move away from it in order to protect ourselves. There's research that talks about that we even wake up in the middle of the night. Either we are aware of it or not, and we are checking to make sure our surroundings are safe. It's like all the hair on your body standing up. Now imagine somebody coming up really close to you. You've experienced that before. You can actually feel in this little space, probably about the length of the hair on your arms, you can feel that person's presence right there. And in that moment, you're going to make a decision. Am I safe or am I not safe? So I want to show you a little video of what it looks like in the womb. So bear with me while I pull this up so you can see it too. So this is about 6 weeks of life. And let me get over here and play this for you. Have a little technical difficulty. All right, let me figure out why we cannot hear you. Everything is on. We're just going to make sure. I'm sorry for this little delay. Let's make sure. Nope, we don't want that. You should be on. Okay, let me try again. Well, this is, it played for me before. There is a little thing over here, but that's on too. Wow. Very upset about that. Okay. So what it's talking about is that this little baby is having its thumb coming towards it, and it literally is pulling away. So for my podcast audience, this is an educational video, and it is from ehd.org, and it's literally showing the withdrawal reflex. So this is very early on in development. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing that particular one right now. Okay, let's get you back over here. And then I'm going to share, well, what does this look like when it's all grown up? Because that's what we were talking about, right? Okay, so as we grow up, we have what's called the crossed extensor reflex. So this one up here is in the upper right corner, is the one I always like to talk about, because most of the time you're really aware if you're about to step on something with your foot. But I think the analogy of when you're cooking and you skim your arm on a hot pot, you don't sit there and go, wow, my flesh is burning. You pull your arm away without even thinking about it. And so this is the idea behind the withdrawal reflexes. The withdrawal reflexes were training your nervous system to know how to respond in a threat. So now, what does it look like besides stepping on a nail and recoiling off of that, or skimming your arm on a hot pot and pulling your arm away? What does this look like, especially, well, I won't say especially, because I do see this even in adults. And in fact, this one adult that I really wanted her to spend some time working on this particular reflex. I was talking to her about it, and I went to try to get up in her space and show her that she would reflexively withdraw away from me, even if I had said, be careful, you're probably going to pull away. But she did, and she pulled away. So it can look that dramatic in anyone. Okay. And that individual also was really going through a lot of anxiety, sometimes with bouts of depression, and really not ever wanting to leave their home. And that to me is stifling somebody's world. But what does it look like for a child? And what would that mean for the child when they're trying to learn? So remember what I said about all the little hair standing up on your body. So if this is that individual, that little person, and it feels like to them that their hair is standing up on their body all the time, that means anything coming into their visual field, their auditory field, their proprioceptive field, or their touch field, even their smell field, they are literally going to constantly be looking to whatever that stimulus is. So in other words, they're highly distracted because their little nervous system is constantly on alert, constantly trying to figure out, am I safe? Is there something coming at me? Do I need to look at it? So imagine a little person in a classroom and somebody drops their pencil, somebody shuffles a piece of paper. They are right there looking at that, and the teacher is going to be going, you need to keep your eyes forward. You need to be looking ahead. And this might be that child's world in the school system, and they might constantly be getting in trouble. And so being highly distracted or being on high alert is one of the most common things that you see. Now, it's also going to interrupt the progression of the primitive reflexes as they come on board. So think of it as a 3-tier. Withdrawal is down on the bottom. And when you're born, another one of the withdrawal responses is a baby actually has a Babinski, meaning that when you stroke the foot, it literally will recoil away. And so as a baby, that's perfectly normal, but then it's supposed to integrate and go away. And if it comes back, either that it didn't integrate or through trauma. A trauma being either something going on in that baby's nervous system or in a older person, not necessarily, it could be even a teenager. Maybe they suffered a traumatic brain injury or repetitive concussions or some other kind of accident, or an adult who's had a stroke or a heart attack. Oftentimes, a Babinski response might come back, and now it's going to be considered a pathological reflex. So these reflexes are meant to be built one on top of the other. They overlap most definitely with different time frames, but they are absolutely supposed to do their job, teach the nervous system what it needs to know, and then it's supposed to integrate. And if it doesn't, it's going to constantly trip up the next thing that's supposed to happen. And so it's like a set of dominoes, and you got to go back and you kind of have to figure out which domino is out of place. Now, I've heard a lot of parents over the years, because we do have a light touch technique that we use that I've learned in studying reflexes and earning credentials in that. But in more traditional settings, there have been other types of brushing techniques using very hard brushes. And I would tell you that that is not the same at all. There is nothing rough inside of the womb. And so if we don't match those environments, we are not going to be getting to the absolute pathways and circuits that are meant to be stimulated, downregulated, whatever the case, whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish in that nervous system. So the idea is that if these withdrawal reflexes don't integrate when they're supposed to, then I'm actually going to stay up on high alert, and that's going to trigger how the perception of life and development is going to occur for that individual. Most of the time when I see children, even some adults that have this particular reflex retain, they also have fear paralysis. And I think now by just kind of going over it, if I'm staying on high alert and that is the pattern that I am practicing, well, then that's the pattern that's going to be laid down in the nervous system. And therefore, I'm going to get into a more stuck state of fear. And that's going to become the lens in which I look at everything. This could be, especially as a newborn, a baby that is just very rigid and almost stuck in extension all the time, that rigidity pattern, and the longer that that stays around, that too is going to be the pattern. And I've seen little babies for whatever reason, and most of the time, it's something that went on. It's something that went on in the cellular energy, primarily for mama. It's never the case that mom and dad aren't contributors. They are both co-contributors to the life of their baby. But baby lives inside of mama, and that becomes the feedback environment. And unfortunately, we were told for years and years and years that mom is just basically an incubator and there's nothing crossing over. And that is completely not true. We know now that mom's state literally influences baby's state. And that's true when we see women that have miscarriages, especially from about 20 weeks and on. It could be her, it could be her baby, it could even be the placenta. MTHFR, if you've ever heard of that, that is your enzyme that regulates your methylation pathway. It's part of your genome. And the way they found this particular gene was based on women that had frequent miscarriages. So what's the state? So the state of your life is definitely going to influence your baby. And then the other contributors are labor and delivery. What goes on during labor and delivery? When these experiences are wonderful and you've got a midwife and you're able to have a vaginal delivery, it's a beautiful experience. A lot of things that I teach, I'm like, whatever you do, don't go around telling everybody that birth creates every problem in the world, because that's not true. There's many beautiful births. And in those situations, the transition from the womb to the world is magnificent. But sometimes it's not. And so it can be the handedness of somebody assisting a baby out. It could be instrumentation, using something to pull that baby out, get that baby out. A cesarean section, whether it is a scheduled one or an emergency one, because there's so many things that go on in that birth process. And we will dive deep into that when we get into the primitive reflexes. It is so important to be birthed in that vaginal canal, through that vaginal canal. There's so many things that go on. So anything that changes that experience, even right down to how fast the cord gets cut. There's a heartbeat in the cord, and it's there to give us the feedback of what's going on with that little baby. And that little baby needs that transition time. And keep that word transition in mind, because we'll really focus on that with the Moro reflex. But it is so important to realize that every stage is important. And now as we get these babies into the world, what is their response? What is their environment? What are we hitting them with, the first few weeks of life? Is it formula? Is it shots? What is it? And we are completely bombarding their systems before they even have an opportunity to get up on their own legs. So there's many, many, many factors that are going to influence something about a reflex. Will it integrate or not? And if it doesn't, usually that history is going to give you so many details, so many red flags that will help you understand when something wasn't just ideal. But the good part is, the closer we look at this at the beginning of life, we could take a newborn and simply look at the history and already begin to project what may or may not happen based on an experience. And that experience first would be, how did the pregnancy come about? How did the pregnancy go? What was the labor and delivery like? What was that baby's introduction into the world? And then how old that baby is when we get to see them. What have they gone through already? What have they accomplished? We have signposts that give us clear indication if that child is going in the right direction or not. The withdrawal reflex is the beginning of how you will always interpret your safety. And this will also be how your child interprets their safety. It frustrates me when people talk about children being so resilient. We can't see it, so we call it resilient. It accumulates. Their experiences accumulate over time. And most of the time, we don't really hear about it because they have no point of reference to say, hey, this isn't quite working like I think it should. We don't really get to hear about it until it was like the 9 young people watching The Chosen, who now already had real life experiences and were given a voice. And you could hear their experiences. And initially you could see, you could tell those experiences had shaped the lens that they were looking at the world. Thank you so much for being with me. Next time, we're going to focus on the Moro reflex. I call that one the enchilada. If you really would like for me to send you that video, I'm so sorry that it wouldn't give us the volume, but you could see the picture, which was most important, and I could give you those details. But if you would like that link, don't hesitate to reach out. I will give it to you. You can contact me right through the website, connectmybrain.com. We have a form that you can fill out if you would like a link, or you would like to ask a question, or you would like to connect. I really encourage you to go ahead and tell me, when are you available? I get so many questions, but then it takes so long to actually try to connect with everybody because you go back and forth trying to figure out when can you talk. So go ahead and tell me some options of days and times that you would be available, and let's make that conversation happen right away. There's lots of information on the website, including a podcast tab. Be sure to subscribe, as well as go over. We have 2 YouTube channels. We have Dr. Laura Hanson and we have Connect My Brain. Connect My Brain is my earlier years and all the things that I would talk about as I was sharing information. I've always loved to do this. But Dr. Laura Hanson is specifically dedicated to the podcast. So feel free to reach out through the website, and you're welcome to call the office, 678-501-5172. And as always, thank you to my podcast manager. She keeps me on track. We do great work together, and we're changing the world. Be blessed.